The UN has called for a protection force in South Sudan to prevent a Rwanda-like genocide. The UN warned earlier this month that ethnic cleansing is taking place in some areas of the East Central African country. At a special session with the UNHCR, the same concerns were raised.
We urge the immediate deployment of the 4,000-strong Regional Protection Force for South Sudan. It's been a number of months since July when the Regional Protection Force was first spoken about. It's December now.
Well, Douglas Johnson is an independent researcher and scholar specialising in Sudan and South Sudan affairs, and he joins us now. Douglas, genocide is quite an apocalyptic term to bandy around. Is it really as serious as that?
There's no doubt that there's an escalation of violence in South Sudan, and more communities are being drawn into it. My own feeling is that the comparison is more like with Somalia, when you had different groups organizing themselves politically or militarily. So you have quite a fragmentation of military confrontations in South Sudan. I'm not sure that we're really at the point where there's the possibility of organized, systematically organized and centrally controlled or centrally targeted genocide. But the violence is very serious, it is very worrying, and it is engulfing more and more communities.
Given the problems you're describing, is 4,000 soldiers enough? That's what's being called for.
The Regional Protection Force is going to be very difficult to organize and to deploy, partly because many of the countries in the region have an interest in South Sudan and they're not completely neutral or impartial. And given the scale of the violence or the territorial location, you can't have a Regional Protection Force that exists only in the capital city. There's going to have to be some way of disengaging military units, whether they're part of the government or part of different opposition groups. And that's where the deployment of the Regional Protection Force might be best applied in something similar to what happened, for instance, in Zimbabwe at the end of UDI when the Patriotic Front forces were brought in certain bases, and you had a Commonwealth force trying to maintain the peace so that you didn't have the Rhodesian army and the guerrilla forces engaging again. It's going to be very difficult, and I think that I think that you can't really think of it as the main thing that will bring peace to South Sudan. It will be only a part of a process.
Is the international will really there to resolve this crisis?
I think that we have to see that we have to be very skeptical about that. The international will has failed in places like Syria. I don't see how it's going to be any different in South Sudan. We also have to take into account that there is going to be a change of administration in the United States, and we have no idea what the U.S. policy towards South Sudan will be after January. And we also know that countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, the various EU countries are very skeptical now about deploying their own military in areas such as South Sudan when there is no obvious political solution on hand.
Douglas Johnson, thank you very much for joining us.